Good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome all the online participants. It is my great pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon. We appreciate you taking time off your busy schedule to join us today for the webinar on special talk on STEM computer science education landscape in the US. This event is open to researchers and those who are interested in STEM computer science education in the US. The objective of this session is to serve as a platform for sharing knowledge and disseminating information about the STEM computer science education landscape in the US, and also to exchange ideas and explore further collaboration on STEM and computer science educations between Thailand and the US. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Saranyu Lamlak, an International Relations Officer of NSTDA. I will be the MC of today. Sawasdee krab. Before we start, I would like to inform all attendees that during the event, your camera will be disabled and your microphone will be mute as well to prevent unwanted noise and commotion. However, you can send your questions to our panelists or speaker in the Q&A session by opening the Q&A panel and typing your question into the text box and then clicking send. To kick off these programs, we are privileged and honored to have Dr. Chadamas Thuvasethakul, Executive Vice President of NSTDA, to deliver the opening remark. Please join me to welcome Dr. Chadamas.
Dr. Allyson Kennedy, Program Director for Education and Workforce Initiatives, National Science Foundation. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the National Science and Technology Development Agency, or NSTDA, I would like to welcome Dr. Kennedy and everyone to Sirinthorn Science Home. It is our privilege to have Dr. Kennedy visiting us and give a special talk on STEM and computer science education landscape in the US today. As Thailand is striving to drive innovation and become an innovation-driven economy, it is imperative that we need to boost up our science and technology human resources, both in terms of quantity and quality. To this end, it is important that our human resources development program starts at the very young age. This place, Sirinthorn Science Home, was established more than 15 years ago to be the place of facility used to organize science activities for youth all year round. And in doing so, we try to leverage NASA's most important assets, that is, our researchers and research labs. We have approximately 10,000 or more students and teachers attending our program each year at the Sirinthorn Science Home. Coming here, students and youth will have the opportunities to learn through various hands-on experiments or do science projects or research to inspire them to love and have a passionate for science career. Our programs are designed not only for students, but also for teachers, as they are the most important person to disseminate scientific knowledge to students through classroom activities or curriculum. For the past few years, the topic that we have increasingly emphasized in our program are coding, data science, and artificial intelligence because of their importance as a foundation for the digital transformation and their significant impact in transforming our way of living and doing things now and onwards. Furthermore, coding has been included in the mandatory curriculum and in our basic education K1 to 12 since 2017. And our researchers have developed a microcontroller board called KitBright to be used as a tool in learning how to code. Coding and computer science can be integrated in all STEM subjects, and it is vital for students to begin learning and understanding about STEM and computer science early on to increase students' critical thinking and overall ability to learn and innovate. With this, it gives me a great pleasure to have Dr. Allyson Kennedy, Program Director for Education and Workforce Initiatives at the National Science Foundation, here with us today to share STEM and computer science education landscape in the US, which I am sure we all can learn from the US experience and use it as a model for us to move forward with our national program. Before ending my remarks, I would like to thank Dr. Allyson Kennedy for spending your valuable time with us today and all participants for your interest in this special talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chadamas, for the wonderful remark. Next, it is now my pleasure to introduce our today's speaker, Dr. Allyson Kennedy, Program Director for Education and Workforce Initiative at the National Science Foundation, or NSF. She is an interdisciplinary biologist with experience in science policy, education, and science communication committed to equity in STEM education. She's currently supports the computer science education and workforce portfolio at NSF to develop a diverse workforce in computing and technology. Dr. Allyson Kennedy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you for having me here at NSTDA. It's an honor and a pleasure to speak with all of you about some of the work that we've been doing in the US around computer science education. So I'll just pull up my PowerPoint here.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Let me help you.
Yeah.
Sorry. Let's click here and share the PowerPoint slide. And let's do a full screen for you.
So I'm Dr. Allyson Kennedy. I am a program officer at the U.S. National Science Foundation. And as was mentioned, I'll be discussing the landscape of STEM education in the U.S. with a pretty large focus on computer science education. So here is the agenda of my talk today. First, I'll start off with a little bit of my own background and why I am in Thailand and the work I'm doing here. Then I'll give an overview of the STEM education landscape in the US. Then I'll give an overview of the National Science Foundation and how it fits into this larger landscape. Then I'll go into an example of a national program around computer science education that we call CS for All. And then I'll close out with some remaining challenges and some future opportunities in computer science education that I hope will frame the question and answer and discussion portion of the day. Okay, so first, who am I and what am I doing here in Thailand? So I am a developmental biologist by training. I received my PhD from Virginia Commonwealth University, which is in Richmond, Virginia. And my research focused on using that cute frog that you see at the top of the screen as a model organism to study embryonic development. I loved working at the research bench. You can see me in one of those images there collecting some eggs for an experiment. But what I loved most about being a scientist was taking my research into classrooms and getting students really excited about what they could do with science. And in particular, I really enjoyed encouraging young women and young girls to pursue science as a career. This passion for education brought me to Thailand the first time in 2014, where I taught English and science at Uthai Wideakom School in Uthai Thani. My experience there with a group of incredible students who were taking all of their classes in both Thai and in English, as well as all of the lessons I learned from my incredible team of co-teachers, Thai co-teachers, really inspired me to want to continue pursuing education as a career. When I returned to the US, I sort of pivoted away from the science bench and into science policy. So I currently serve as a program officer at the National Science Foundation in computer science education. And at the NSF, I manage a portfolio of grants that provide support for computer science opportunities for every student across K through 20. So opportunities for the smallest students in kindergarten and primary school all the way up to students who are pursuing their graduate degrees into higher education. I am here again in Thailand for a second time as part of an Embassy Science Fellowship, which is a program run by the US Department of State that places federal employees in US embassies across the globe to work on projects that are important to the host country and further science diplomacy. So the specific goals of my fellowship here in Thailand are to examine the landscape of STEM education, talking to organizations like the NSTDA and others who are doing incredible work here in the country. Based on those conversations, I aim to make a report of recommendations as Thailand continues its future efforts in STEM education. And finally, to identify some areas of shared interests between our two countries. Okay, so now that I've given you a bit of context of why I'm here, now I'll go into the overview of what STEM education looks like in the US. So the structure of the US educational system is really similar to that here in Thailand. We have compulsory public education for the first 12 years, including primary and secondary school. Once students have their high school diploma, they can go directly into the workforce or they can pursue higher education. Higher education has sort of two main pathways in the US. Students can either go directly into a bachelor degree program at a 4-year college, or they can first start in a community college, which is a 2-year program. Students who finish a 2-year program can either transfer into a bachelor degree or they can go directly into the workforce. And there are many jobs in which students don't need a 4-year degree in the US, so they can finish the 2-year degree and get many jobs, especially in IT in particular. Students who do receive a bachelor's degree can, just like here in Thailand, can continue their higher education into professional programs like medical school or law school, or into academic research programs to pursue their PhD. Now, where Thailand and the US are very different in terms of education is the way that curriculum is developed and implemented. So unlike Thailand, the US does not have a national curriculum. Instead, we have academic standards that are implemented by state. So these standards sort of outline the key learning concepts across subjects for each grade level. And they're developed by state governments in coordination with other public organizations and sometimes nonprofits. The closest thing we have to a national curriculum is the Common Core standards. These are for math, reading, and social sciences. The map on the slide is showing how these standards are used across the country. So the 40 or so blue states use all of those standards to develop their curriculum. That teal state at the top uses some of the standards, and the light and brown states do not use any of those Common Core standards. They've created their own. Now, standards for science and standards for computer science are separate from Common Core, and they are not used nearly as widely as this Common Core standards are. So all of that to say, STEM curricula can vary very much across the US. So states have a lot of control about what goes into their curriculum and how they use it in the state. So despite that, even though states do have a lot of their own independent control, they are all aligned under a federal STEM education strategic plan. So every 5 years, the White House, in coordination with other US government agencies, writes a report to sort of guide how STEM education should be implemented across the country. In the most recent version here, Charting a Course for Success, the US has 3 main visions in terms of STEM education. The first is to develop STEM literacy across all grades, so all students being exposed to STEM in some way. The second being to prepare a STEM workforce for the future, recognizing that many of the jobs of the future are going to require STEM skills. And the third is to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in STEM so that every student has equal access and opportunity to pursue these careers. To meet this vision, the report also outlines some key goals to do this and some key strategies. So the US is very interested in developing partnerships across different sectors, engaging students across different disciplines, and building computational literacy. I've bolded this last one because I'm going to talk about this in a little bit more detail in a few minutes. Okay, so that's a very, very broad view of STEM education in the US. There's a lot of nuance, as I think you can probably understand given the way that our state system works. But I'd like to now move into how the National Science Foundation fits into that overall view. So the NSF is an independent federal agency. We have an $8.8 billion annual budget, where almost $2 billion of that goes towards STEM education. So it's a pretty large amount of money, and we make about 12,000 new awards each year. And these awards are in basic scientific research and education efforts. Sort of similar to the White House strategic plan that I just talked about, NSF has its own strategic plan that guides the programs and the funding that we distribute. Our vision is very nicely aligned to the White House's vision. So some of our key goals for the next several years are to advance the frontiers of research and innovation, ensure that STEM is accessible and inclusive to everyone, and really we strive to be a leader in the global science and engineering enterprise, which is why we are interested in partnerships with our international colleagues. So as I mentioned, the NSF funds basic scientific research. We view research sort of like planting trees, right? So we like to fund things early and often so that we have lots of beautiful shade in the future. I think the best example of this is the most recent image of a black hole. I hope many of you have seen this image. It's pretty incredible. It's a huge scientific breakthrough across many STEM disciplines. And it was a huge international collaboration across many different countries, using many different facilities, and scientists from all kinds of backgrounds. Huge breakthrough in science, right? None of this would have been possible, though, without some foundational scientific knowledge. So NSF is interested in that part of scientific research. For many years, we have funded research in computing like data capture, computer graphics, algorithms, AI, data privacy, the kinds of things that were fundamental to making the equipment and making that image that you just saw possible. And so we really see this as planting a seed so that we can see the fruits of that labor later. Similarly, our philosophy extends into education. So this is Katie Bowman. She was one of the researchers on the team that took the picture of the black hole. She was a graduate student when she started, and now she's one of our more successful early career researchers. And throughout her academic career, the National Science Foundation has given her scholarship money, has given her research money. And so just like we view research funding, we really believe in investing in scientific researchers themselves. Okay, so that was sort of a broad overview of the NSF, and now I'm going to talk about a specific program that I work on called the Computer Science for All program, which is a national effort in computer science education. So as I mentioned earlier, the high school curriculum is implemented differently depending on the state, which means that we currently only have about half of our states offering computer science as a course for students. And this is a problem because if we look to the future, we can see that You know, almost 70% of new jobs in STEM are going to be in computing or require some computing skills. If we look at the percentage of bachelor's degrees in computer science, though, we only get about 10% of students graduating with degrees in computer science. So we have a huge gap to fill, and that's going to start early in high school and before that. So it's really important for us to build the computational literacy of our entire nation, but it's particularly important in the US for us to consider equity as we build computational literacy. So historically, there are several groups in the US who have been sort of marginalized and underrepresented in STEM fields. You can see from these graphs that women, for example, their participation in computer science majors in college has been decreasing for many years. So women represent 50% of the US population, but currently only 20% of computer science majors. Similarly, Hispanic people comprise about 20% of the US population, but only 10% of computer science majors. So this indicates a systemic problem that we would like to solve so that everyone has equal access, equal opportunity in these fields. So the Computer Science for All initiative is trying to address some of these issues, right? It's a national movement to provide every student in K through 12 education with the opportunity to learn computer science. This initiative was started during the Obama administration and has since gained national attention and involved many organizations. Here's just kind of a glimpse of the types of organizations that participate in CS for All. So in addition to government entities like the National Science Foundation and the Department of Education and the White House, there are also higher education organizations, school districts, nonprofits, after-school programs, libraries, even churches involved in this big movement. Importantly, policymakers, families, and champions are also involved in this movement so that when we have a best practice that works, we can codify that into a policy that can be implemented at the state level. So NSF's role in all of this is to fund partnerships between research institutions and schools so that together researchers and practitioners can develop curriculum, activities and assessments, and teacher professional development opportunities around computer science. Now, we support a number of different curricula, which I'll outline in just a second. But before I do that, I wanted to demonstrate how things that all of these curricula have in common. Everything that we support is problem and project-based. They are hands-on, which make them engaging to students, but at the same time rigorous, so they're still learning those core computer science topics. And importantly, they are all meant to be inspiring. We strive to show students what they can do with computer science, to see themselves as scientists, and to understand that even if they don't become a computer scientist, that computing really is integral to their everyday lives, and we want them to understand how the technology works that they use every day. So here's some examples of the kinds of curricula that we support. So in primary school, grades kindergarten through the 8th grade, we support a bunch of unplugged activities, which I know NSTDA also does, which doesn't require any computers, but students still learn some of the fundamentals of computational thinking and computer science. We also sort of later in primary school support curriculum that integrates concepts of computer science into other subjects like algebra, social sciences, etc. A little bit later in primary school and into early secondary school, in the US we call this middle school, so grades 6 through 9, we have a course that we support called Exploring Computer Science. This is an introductory computing class that doesn't have any coding, but is a little more in depth with computing concepts than some of the curricula that students are receiving in primary school. Even later in secondary school, we support an advanced placement exam. So in the US, advanced placement exams are courses that students take in high school, but they can receive college credit after passing the exam. So we support the Advanced Placement Computer Science Principles course and exam, which is a portfolio-based course. So students throughout the semester, they put together several projects as part of a larger portfolio, and they learn a programming language. To give you a sense of the impact of some of these programs, here's the distribution of that Exploring Computer Science curriculum. So that's the introductory course typically used in late primary, early secondary school. It's being implemented across 34 states with over 50,000 students. And this data is from 2019. I'm sure that's increased since then. This is a very successful program. The AP Computer Science Principles exam that I mentioned is in every state with more than 100,000 students taking the exam each year. Now, before the Computer Science Principles course was established, there was one other AP Computer Science class. And what this graph is showing you is in 2017, when we introduced the new Computer Science AP exam, the number of women taking that exam more than doubled. So this is a really positive step in the right direction. As I said, these curricula are really hands-on, engaging, and exciting for students. And so we hope to continue growing this number so that more students and more women students are taking these exams. Okay, so while this is a step in the right direction, there are still some challenges that the US struggles with, and I want to share those as we look forward to kind of what happens next. So one of the biggest challenges we have in the US is providing access to everyone. We call this the digital divide, where students in cities and urban areas have more access than those students who are living in remote rural areas. And so being able to bridge that digital divide is a huge priority for the US. As I mentioned, we really strive to promote underrepresented groups in STEM and computer science. And while we've made some headway, as you saw from the data from the AP exam, there's still a long way to go to get to parity for women and for other ethnic and racial minority groups in the US. And finally, this is always a challenge, is to increase quality teacher professional development opportunities and to be able to reach teachers in all districts. So this kind of goes back to that digital divide problem again, ensuring that all teachers are getting the opportunity to be prepared to teach computer science in their classrooms. Some of the opportunities that I think we can leave this conversation with is that the US is really prioritizing partnerships across disciplines, organizations, and sectors, which I think will really help to address some of these big issues. We've all had to pivot to online learning during COVID, and while that has been somewhat of a challenge, it is also an opportunity to reach students and teachers who wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity to participate in STEM and CS opportunities. So I think understanding how to leverage that moving past COVID, post-COVID, is a key area of opportunity for us to think about. And then finally, with the US priority of collaborating with our international colleagues, I think there's a great opportunity to learn and collaborate with one another as we address these really big picture issues in STEM education. So I will stop there. I would love to take questions. I want to say thank you again to NSTDA for hosting me. I'm so privileged to be here and happy to answer questions or open the floor up to discussion.
Sorry. Oh, yeah. Stop sharing. There you go. Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Allyson Kennedy, for your informative and useful presentation. Now, we would like to open the floor for the Q&A session. If you have any questions you'd like to ask our today's speaker, please do not hesitate to type your questions in the text box and send it to us.
I can start the first question.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kennedy, for your great and very informative presentation. I'm interested in when you mentioned about the computational literacy, because that's always our the question that we were asked. You know, you organize these kind of activities, these kind of sessions. How do you measure their learning, or how do you know that they have the competency level that they should have? So when you're talking about computational literacy, I wonder if there is any kind of the tools, measurement tools that you use to measure this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, we do. We have several different instruments that we can use to measure student competency in CS. So different programs will do different things. We have some, surveys that we give pre and post an activity, for example. And those surveys will ask students sort of key questions about computational concepts, and we can compare before and after to see if they took away the main points. Embedded in those courses that I talked about, Exploring Computer Science and the AP course, embedded in those are assessments throughout the semester. So at each unit, teachers can evaluate if the student is understanding the key concepts, and if not, they can fine-tune the curriculum to address those areas of confusion. In addition, those courses really emphasize debugging as part of the curriculum. So that means when students don't understand something, they are being taught to think about how to fix that, how to ask the right questions to better understand it. So we're sort of teaching students to ask questions throughout, so that they're really part of the learning process just as much as the teacher is part of the teaching process.
Okay, so it's kind of multidimensional.
It is, yes,
right?
yeah, and it's still really hard, right? It's still really hard to measure having all of those tools, because if you're asking a student to report on their own knowledge, sometimes that can get a little fuzzy. But that's why we layer it with these formal tests. We get student feedback during courses. You have to sort of layer it in multiple ways to get a full picture of what the student has learned.
Okay, thank you.
Your presentation is not every school in each stage that join the program. And do you have plans to expand it in the future?
Yes. We are, that is the mission of CS for All, is to get it into every school, because even within a state, the state's divided into school districts, and each district is run differently. And then even at the school level, there's a lot of autonomy there. And so everything has to be tailored to the specific context. And that is what we at the NSF are doing, is funding opportunities to bring this big curriculum into those specific contexts, so that we can continue to scale it out, as you say.
How about the teacher? You need to train the teacher also.
Yes, absolutely. And teacher professional development is a huge part of the CS for All program. So whenever the curriculum is being brought to a school district, it is accompanied by teacher professional development workshops, so that they can learn how to implement it in their school.
Here we have the same problem. We can give some limited area in the school, and then we try to expand it. We also found the same challenge as the city and remote. Why?
Yeah.
Quite obvious also.
Yes, it's a huge problem. I think one thing I've heard while I've been here and talking to schools around Thailand is this train the trainer model, which I've seen be very successful in the US, and it seemed to be very successful here as well. And I think that's a strategy to leverage, especially when we're thinking about the urban-rural divide, because you can train one teacher and they become an ambassador for their region, right? And they can help further the impact of the program. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Seems like we have some questions from online participants. The first question asking, how do Thai graduate students in engineering and computer science get involved in learning CS in the US? where to start?
That's a good question. So I believe there are probably exchange programs at individual universities in the US where students can come for a summer or a semester to learn at a US institution, at a US university. And I would say there's probably scholarships for that as well. I don't know if from the Thai side there are opportunities for international exchange. That might be a question for someone else in the room, but certainly in the US there are some programs that do that.
And the next question is pretty much the same as the first one, but this time the question is asking, would the collaboration extend to undergraduate level? Would it be possible for an undergraduate student to have an internship in the US, or student in the US come to do an internship in Thailand, and or middle school, high school student exchange programs sort of?
That's a good question. I don't know of any formal programs like that through the National Science Foundation, for example. However, individual universities could have that kind of program for undergraduate students. Now, I'm not sure about high school exchange programs. That I actually just don't know the answer to. But in terms of undergraduate and graduate programs, individual universities would be the best source of information. So if you're a student here and that's something that you're interested in, I think the first step is finding a research university here in Thailand and seeing if there's any faculty there that have collaborations in the US. And that would be the route to see if you can do an exchange over a summer or something.
Thank you very much for your answer. And the next question is referred to the previous answer that you answered before, but it's about the teacher qualification. The participant asking, what are teacher qualifications to teach computer science in the US? High school, do they require to get a bachelor degree in computer science?
That's a great question. So it has a very complicated answer. So most teachers in the US who are teaching computer science do not have a computer science background. Many have STEM backgrounds, but we are at such a high demand for computer science right now that sometimes the gym teacher, the art teacher will be teaching computer science. So that's one part of the question is no, they don't have to have a bachelor's in computer science. The second part is it depends on the state. The qualification or the certification. So some states require that teachers take a specialized exam to specialize in computer science. Other states don't have that same requirement. You just kind of need to take a certain number of professional development hours in the subject area. So it really varies by state. And this kind of goes back to what I said earlier in terms of the Computer Science for All program. When we tailor curriculum to each state, we also tailor professional development to each state. So if a state requires that teachers take this exam, that becomes part of the professional development, is that they get prepared to take that exam.
Okay, thank you for your clarification. The next question asking, I am a university instructor at a computer science and engineering department. I have been doing research on online learning technology. Is there any opportunity for Thai researchers to join the NSF projects or project you are working on?
So that's a good question. So so yes, I think so. You need to find a collaborator in the US, which you can do if you go to, I wonder if I can put this in the chat, but you can go to the NSF award database and you can look up by keyword or discipline area what we've funded in a particular area. From there, you can find potentially a collaborator in the US in a subject area that is of interest to you. In terms of the funding, though, the NSF funds US researchers. So that's where the funding comes from on the American side. On the Thai side, I'm sure there are sources of funding that would support that part of the research. But in terms of just forming that collaboration, that's one good place that you can start. Can I put that in the chat?
Sure. Dr. Allyson typing for the website to look for any opportunity for you. Now I think I have one more question from online participant. The question is, what is the big barrier to expand CS education in Thailand, especially for K-12?
In Thailand เหรอ ทำไม In Thailand หรือ in US ไม่รู้ได้ไง
In Thailand, that's why I'm a bit confused.
Alright.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. What is the biggest barrier to expanding CS education in Thailand, especially for K-12? I think they probably means in the US. I guess.
Or maybe you can answer from US experience. The challenges in expanding the computer education to wider coverage, maybe.
Okay, so I'll speak to my US perspective, and I shared some of those on the slide, right? So access across urban-rural divide, equitable participation by all groups in the US, that becomes a challenge. Teacher professional development is a challenge. I would say, and I don't know if this is true in Thailand, but in the US, we currently have a teacher shortage. Especially because of COVID, teachers are leaving the profession at a kind of alarming pace. And so we're losing a lot of talented educators, and a lot of those educators are in computer science. So that's a real challenge for us. I can't speak to the biggest challenge here in Thailand, not having that perspective. I leave that to maybe other experts in the room.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer then. I'm not sure if there are any other questions from our on-site participants.
I think from the perspective of the funding agency, when you fund a project like this, what kind of outcome you are looking for? Output is okay. You can say that how many teachers, how many students have been trained, so and so. But the outcome is more, or even impact, it's more difficult to measure. So I don't know, because we, NSTDA, as a performing agency, we have to submit the proposal to the funding agency. And that's the question they love to ask. What kind of impact you would gonna deliver?
Right.
So in your case, from the NSF perspective, how do you look for impact or outcome?
It's really hard. Yeah, it's really hard. Some of these things aren't measurable, right? You know, you can't really measure one student seeing themselves as scientists and pursuing that career. It's really hard to capture that in data. We do have some sort of guidepost metrics across what we consider the academic pathway. So we look at the number of students who are enrolling in a computer science degree program at an undergraduate university, and then we look at how many are graduating. And then we look at what kinds of students are those. Are they representative of the US, or are they only specific populations that are finishing? I mean, that tells us a little bit about the impact of our programs, if they're working, if they're keeping students in the field. So yeah, it's hard. I don't have a great answer. We're actually kind of grappling with this ourselves as an agency of what does it mean to have impact? Is it just increasing numbers, or what are other metrics that we should be looking at? Yeah.
And it takes a long time before the impact is realized, especially if you're starting at the young age. You know, you have to follow them through the pathways.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
absolutely.
We don't have a good answer for that
Right.
also.
Right. And it's hard too. I mean, we can look at the tech industry, right? We can look at CEOs in tech and say, okay, we're not really there yet. We don't have, very many women there. So we have a lot more work to do. But yeah, it's a hard question to answer.
You mentioned the trainer program. You have that in the US, and you can share the story.
The train the trainer? So NSF supports a lot of train the trainer models. they are, again, they're really tailored toward districts and states. But under the umbrella of CS for All, we fund a lot of programs like that. And so what we'll do is we'll convene a workshop, and then those teachers become the trainers and they go back to their schools, and then there's some consistent touch points throughout the rest of the program where the provider will go into the school and sort of, help the trainer as they implement the broader program.
Just training one time, become a trainer.
Right. But in some cases, the original provider will still keep in contact with the first trainer to make sure that, if they need any assistance as they expand out, that they have it. Yeah.
I think another thing that is a challenge is the scaling up, because we have many pilot programs, but after the pilot, how do you make that sustainability into the mainstream operation of, whatever agency that is supposed to do that at a larger scale? Yeah, so we have many programs maybe can go further after the pilot level. I don't know whether it's the same for the US. And you cannot just keep asking the money from the funding agency because they have to fund other projects as well.
Right.
How in the US you have this kind of issue?
Oh yes. I mean that's definitely true in the U.S. as well. We form a lot of partnerships across sectors. So we like to partner. That's part of why we're in this CS consortium, which includes government funding agencies, but it also includes groups like Google and Microsoft, who have much more money than the government, in addition to sort of local policymakers. So we're really trying to spread out that responsibility to everybody who's in the ecosystem of education, so that they're not reliant on our funding forever, because we can't support them.
Yeah. So my earlier question, I was going to ask about the role of the private sector in this kind of initiative.
Yeah.
Does NHF partner with the private sector also in some programs?
Yes. So in education programs, we don't formally partner with the private sector. We do informally, where we'll work with Google to hold a convening. So we'll do things like that. But in other areas of NSF, in our research programs, we do partner with industry like Amazon and Google to fund the research, because it's very relevant to them to have that. So NSF partners with the private industry in kind of different ways. Sometimes it's funding, sometimes it's just kind of idea sharing. But we see them as a critical part of this landscape, not only because of the funding piece, but because of the technology that they develop.
The organization that can request or submit the proposal for funding from the NSF doesn't have to be only the government.
Oh,
or
no.
Private sector can also submit.
The main group of proposers at the NSF are academic research institutions. So universities are primary. That's who we fund the most of. We do fund some non-for-profit organizations, NGOs, and some private organizations, but not a lot of those.
Allyson, I have one question. I'm interested about computer science activity which relate another subject. Yeah.
With
Another subject which integrate or relate with another subject example, biology,
Mhm.
physics, how I get information on the example of this activity.
Sure. There's an online program that's called Bootstrap. Bootstrap, like a boot. Yeah. And that is integrated computer science with algebra, but they also have a couple other subject areas. I can share it with you after. Yeah. But that's the primary one I would recommend. Yeah.
Any further questions? I think there is no any further questions for now already. And I think Dr. Chadamas might have anything further to discuss after this webinar. So I think for now, I would like to inform that we are now come to the end of the session. On behalf of NASA, we would like to thank you, Dr. Allyson Kennedy, once again for your excellent presentation on all useful information on STEM computer science education landscape in the US. And also thank you, Dr. Chadamas, including all online and on-site participants for your kind interest and very engaging participation. It's been our pleasure to host this event and look forward to seeing you again in our upcoming event. Thank you very much for today and goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.